Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to our panel series on State of the Industry for Q1 2022. I am Lisa Hickerson, the business development manager, of New York. So I'll be your host today. We have an exciting 1-hour discussion for you. I'm sure at this point, no one needs instruction on how to use Zoom, but there is a Q&A feature at the bottom. We'll be taking questions throughout the entire panel series discussion. And then we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end to hopefully address any of your open questions that you may have. And if we don't get to it, I promise we will follow up. So the format of our discussion today is quick market outlook from each region. We have representation from West Coast to East Coast. And then we'll get into a discussion on the ever popular topic of supply chain, which unfortunately is not fake news, sustainability, labor, escalation, and just other elements impacting our industry, and around the nation. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our panelists that we have today, different leaders from around our nation. So from a national perspective, we have Julia Geisweit, our Vice President of Sustainability, and then also Mike Bruskin, our Chief Procurement Officer and Supply Chain Expert. From a regional perspective, I'll start on the West Coast and work my way east. We have Bill Ketchum, General Manager of our Seattle business unit, Nino Adamo, our Business Manager of SoCal out of Anaheim, Jim Lears, our Manager of Business Development, my counterpart in Mid-Atlantic region out of DC, Jeff Justin, Vice President and Business Manager for Orlando, sunny Florida, much warmer than it is up here in New York. And then our moderator for today will be Sarah Kendall, our Vice President and General Manager of New York. So I will let you take it away, Sarah. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Lisa, thank you. And welcome to my colleagues, our panelists today, and welcome to you, our audience. If you're joining us on our panel series for the first time, thank you for being with us today and sharing an hour of your day with us. If you are a returning customer, you may remember the last time we had an industry roundtable regarding the market was in November. And so in November, we talked about all of the same issues, supply chain, we talked about labor, but it was before the Omicron surge, which changed a lot of plans for businesses to bring their people back to work. And it was definitely before we have now the largest ground conflict war in Europe in 70 plus years. And in an age of globalization, that definitely does have an impact on us right here at home in all of our regions. So thanks for being with us. Today, we're gonna, as Lisa said, revisit all of those same topics, see what's changed, what's stayed the same. And we're gonna start with the market outlook. So let's go to the West Coast first, and we'll start with Bill. So what are you seeing in the Seattle and Northwest market these days?
Thanks, Sarah. It's, actually, if we go back to the start of the pandemic, the Seattle market, and when I say Seattle, I do mean Seattle, Bellevue combined, it was pretty robust at that point. So the rebound from the pandemic was pretty quick for us. The market has stayed robust year over year. We're seeing very similar issues with escalation across the country. If we look at some key projects that we've been pricing from 21 into 22, we've seen a 10 to 12% increase. That's pretty consistent with our trade partner survey, where they're saying that it's about a 2% quarter over quarter increase. And all of that's largely driven by high activity. There's still a lot of bidding activity in the market. Supply chain, as Mike's going to get into, continues to be an issue, driving cost up. Our backlog is filling up for trade partners. There continues to be labor pressures across the board. And I think the expectation for 22 is that that's going to, from an escalation standpoint, going to be pretty consistent. We have the added issue here in King County, specifically with a labor dispute between the Teamsters and 4 sand and gravel companies. That strike's been ongoing. We're in the 5th month of that. So that's something we're navigating. But our outlook for the future in terms of the market in general remains high. Our backlog is strong. We have strong backlog well into 2027, which is unique for us, but exciting. And that gives us opportunity for diversity of projects from K-12 to higher ed to healthcare, which is a big focus of ours. Life science is extremely strong here, and we're seeing a lot of players come in from other parts of the country to enter the Seattle market. So the outlook is good, but still a lot of concerns around escalation and, of course, our specific labor strife issues.
Nino, how about you? Any similar trends?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And yes, absolutely. We see a lot of similar trends in Southern California as Bill sees in Seattle. In particular, some of the market segments that are growing probably faster than even the market can bear are life sciences, pharmaceutical, healthcare. There's a lot of overlaps between life sciences and healthcare. Healthcare also is a rebound from the pandemic. We see a lot of interest in the market for outpatient type of facilities to kind of decongest the hospital bed towers. And we also see a strong higher education market coming back. There's a lot of funding pouring into schools. And what's interesting is that as part of this increase in construction spending, there is an increase in permit applications. And then we see some of our local jurisdictions, especially LADBS, which is the Los Angeles Building and Safety Department, really suffering a congestion of requests. And so we see extension in timing of issuing permits. So we've been, all of our projects have been applying creative strategies to try to mitigate that risk. But the market is strong and continues to be strong almost in all sectors in Southern California. The same as we see it in San Diego too, which San Diego tends to be its own market compared to Los Angeles. It is really bringing a lot of work, and of course, as a hub of life science and pharmaceutical that continues to grow and to expand into the Los Angeles region as well.
Let's jump back to the East Coast and sunny Florida. Jeff, what are you seeing?
Yeah, very, very similar sentiments that Bill and Nino shared. The market continues to be strong. Obviously, we have the same challenges that everyone is facing with supply chain and labor. I think a little bit different, obviously, specific to Central Florida. Obviously, very tourism driven. During the pandemic, we did see a lot of work come to a halt because of that. Just not clear on what the outlook was going to be, but we're seeing a lot of those projects restarting, and the growth is continuing to be fueled by obviously the pent-up demand for domestic travel and tourism. So market really is in 2022 and 2023, above and beyond rebounding in terms of where it was in 20 and 21. Some of the specific markets that are really on the rise there, obviously residential, as people continue to migrate south. We'll hit a little bit more on that, but multifamily is a big market right now, as well as healthcare, similar to what Bill and Nino talked about. But we're obviously, in addition to that too, we do have a lot of growth in the hospitality market, as well as the entertainment with obviously theme parks nearby here in Central Florida. One thing that's a little unique to us too, that we're seeing a lot of continued development in is the Space Coast. We've got a lot of work that is happening out on the near Cape Canaveral with all of the additional projects that SpaceX, Blue Origin, those type of things that are occurring out there, along with NASA, just continues to the residual effects of those corporations and the new aerospace corporations coming into that area is really fueling an additional level of market activity in that Space Coast area.
Great. Jim, you're up. We're getting closer to New York. If you can't tell, I'm kind of going around the country.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Similar to the others, before I start, we define Mid-Atlantic as Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland. And I'd say diversity has really helped us thrive in the Mid-Atlantic region. So office and retail has slowed down, and technically it's slowed down the entire sector in D.C. proper. But we're lucky enough to have a robust data center market and industrial market that's just absolutely exploded in the outlying suburbs. So for some perspective, Northern Virginia, and really just two counties in Northern Virginia, Loudoun and Prince William, they're home to about 250 data centers with 30 million square feet right now, and another 20 million square feet in the pipeline in the next couple of years. On the warehouse side, which has been fueled by e-commerce, we'll see 6.3 million square feet, a new warehouse just in the next 18 months. And that's enough to fill the National Mall. We've seen healthcare pick up, same as the others. I think the lack of beds during the height of the COVID pandemic was eye-opening. We've seen education pick up. Hospitality is slowly picking up. Life science is hot, and multifamily is red hot. Another perspective moment here. There'll be more deliveries in 2022 than any other year in the last 3 decades for multifamily. Just like the rest of the country, the subs are busy, particularly the electricians and iron workers. The data center and warehouse work has taken them offline. As an owner, you really have to have a good project to draw labor. Our designers are still busy, and as the canary in the tunnel, that makes me feel good. We're busy looking for good people. And generally speaking, like Bill, I'm optimistic about the next 18 months.
That's great. Thank you. Great news all around the country. Our regions are also incredibly different, but yet we're hearing the same story. And I would say New York is no different. We really have a growing demand. It's still a buyer's market in this town. Construction filings, similar to some of what Nina was saying, are up. They're up 10% since last year. We're getting close to those pre-pandemic levels. And there's a real push for residential. There's still not enough supply in the market. Commercial life sciences continues to be very, very hot in New York. But we are still seeing some significant commercial vacancies that haven't really yet started to correct themselves to pre-pandemic levels. But all of the same crunches are happening here in New York when it comes to cost increases. We might have a buyer's market, but we still have costs that are increasing, and we're seeing a real push on getting the right labor on the right project. So Julia, before we start digging in a little bit more on these issues, can you tell us from a national perspective, sort of what's happening in the sustainability world? What's trending?
Yeah, so embodied carbon, still a major mega trend. Mass timber is a mega trend. Both of those are being spurred by the increasing amounts of data and services around life cycle emissions and thinking about buildings. Cities and states are rolling out, or at least promising to roll out, building performance standards. So we're starting to think more about prepare ourselves for a boom in these deep energy retrofit modernization type of construction. And then anything related to circular economy, circularity is right on its heels. But really supply chain ESG has exploded, and you see more and more financing tied to ESG metrics in some way. So particularly for our national clients, we might see an RFP come in the door, but right along with it is the questionnaire asking about our ethics policy or our stance on human rights or our greenhouse gas emissions for the last 3 years. And you guys probably saw just last week the proposed ruling from the SEC about climate risk disclosure. And those rules are meant to give investors a clearer view of how companies are going to managing their present, but as well as their future challenges they're going to be posed by climate change. So a big trend towards sustainability disclosure and transparency coming from investors. And then no more greenwashing. It doesn't fly. Sustainability programs have to be impactful and they have to have substance.
Can you tell us what you mean when you say greenwashing?
Greenwashing is, I'd equate it to lip service.
Okay.
Kind of that gap between the words and the actions is probably a good way to describe greenwashing.
Okay, folks, today's vocabulary word is greenwashing. All right, so a lot of the same themes from November. So, like that old saying, everything changes and everything stays the same. So Nina, let's dig in on California a little bit. What can you tell me is vastly different in California than maybe it was pre-pandemic or a few years ago? How has the industry really been changed by the push on the market?
Well, I think that is the two biggest differences that I can tell from the last couple of years, and really the last year. First, we kind of touched upon is really the revolution that we're seeing with life sciences. And it's really driven by the new immunotherapies and also the fact that you have commercial developers who got into the game, creating these new lab space for small startup companies that eventually will become life science companies or may become life science companies, and then building out their own facilities. Specifically for life sciences, I see a focus on speed to market from our clients. They're really, schedules are number one on these projects. Of course, they're interested in keeping the budget in check, but actually that speed to market is also a strategy to contain, to a certain extent, escalation. I know we're going to talk a lot more about it later. But speed to market has to do also with the competitive advantage that these various there's a lot of competition, of course, in life sciences. The second trend that I see that is different is the fact that we are not seeing the commercial office market picking up as much as we thought it was going to after the pandemic. Vacancy rates, especially in downtown Los Angeles, are still pretty high. They're over 20%. And we actually see, although people are coming back to work, they're not necessarily coming back into this high density office spaces. There are a lot of developers that are getting into the concept of creating office space, in converting maybe warehouse space and other parts of LA into a more open concept. And then, of course, we have a lot of people that are still working remotely, and they have realized that there is efficiencies gained in sort of the remote working that we've all experienced at some point throughout the pandemic. So those are the biggest trends I've seen after the pandemic.
So I put those two things, life sciences and then the commercial market impact, I put them in the category of pandemic fallout, right? There's these things we never anticipated in 2019 to happen. Who would have ever thought that the commercial market in New York City would still be struggling to get back to work? And we're seeing things improve. We're seeing more activity in the marketplace, but the amount of moves that commercial tenants are making, it just doesn't exist anymore. And it's part of this pandemic fallout. You know, another thing that happened was the migration. So it's not only the migration of workers out of the office, but also the migration of people to different parts of the country. So, you know, rue those who said New York was dead, but there were a lot of people who left urban areas. And, you know, Jeff, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about, you know, is there any impact to your market because of the migration of people that we saw in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing right now for Florida and Central Florida specifically is the residential market. You know, not only single family homes, but also multifamily developments. We continue to see more and more multifamily developments across the board from not only, you know, downtown urban settings, but also on the outskirts in the suburbs areas as well. And that just continues to fuel pressures when it comes to labor and supply chain, as well as cost escalators within the market. But that to me is definitely, in terms of one of the things that we've seen coming, you know, on the backside of the pandemic, as opposed to going into it where the market was, and that was not as strong as it currently is today. And that's something that we continue to keep an eye on.
Does anybody else have any other impacts because of migration?
I can just share, we're seeing a lot of the same things. Life science was definitely a fallout of the pandemic. And we had, I would argue, maybe two key developers here locally that was doing life science work. And through the pandemic and now even today, there are a handful of other developers who don't normally do life science work, who are looking to repositioning existing buildings, look at new developments, but also players who are coming in from other markets who are looking at the Seattle market from a life science standpoint. The other thing is there's a big tech foundation here in Seattle, and the majority of those companies have announced return to work plans And just in the past several weeks, the silver lining of the pandemic was traffic got a lot better from a commuting standpoint, and it's starting to get bad again. So that's some signal that folks are going back to work. We do a lot of high end and low income residential work here in Seattle as well. We thought that was going to slow down. It's actually starting to pick back up. So I think that's also a sign, to Jeff's point, that housing, even with escalation, there's such demand for housing here, and there's been so much pressure on it with folks coming into Seattle, that those projects are starting to pencil out, even with the challenges that we're facing.
We have a question here that just popped in. I'm going to go off script because Lisa told me to take questions at the end, but somebody just asked a great question. What our definition of life sciences? So before we go any further, because I know we're going to keep talking about it, who wants to define life science?
I'll try to take this on, which, by the way, is an excellent question. It's created a bit of confusion in the market because, especially because now it overlaps with the commercial market segment, having all the developer types of clients getting involved in the conversion of existing spaces into lab. But my personal definition of life science, to create a new term, is pharma light. For any of you who've been involved with the heavy pharma, you get a lot of fairly unique systems, process piping in particular, but things that you cannot tend to only see in the pharmaceutical market segment. Life science focuses mostly on clean labs, and it overlaps sometimes with healthcare. It overlaps with higher education, where you get also clients that build the labs for education purposes. And for the most part, the new immunotherapies don't require the heavy process-driven type of systems that pharmaceuticals do. And so they can be, those products, in fact, they don't call them drugs, they call them therapies, can be created out of sophisticated lab. In most cases, it involves clean rooms. It requires FDA certification and approval, so it goes through a process of validation. But at least in my mind, that's the difference between life science and heavy pharma.
Right, thank you. So let's move on and talk about supply chain. Mike, you've been incredibly patient. Thank you very much. You guide procurement for the entire Turner organization. You have your fingers in 45 plus different business units and areas of our country. Can you just give us a high level overview of what you're seeing around the nation?
Well, it's a lot to capture in a short amount of time, right? In 20 and in 21, we talked about the trifecta. It was the impacts of the pandemic. It was natural disasters like the Texas winter storms. And it was unprecedented demand, both in residential, but also data centers, distribution centers, and warehouses, really putting a draw on everything, right? We all saw the ships lined up off port. They couldn't get in, right? We all know that you can't get a car because they have no semiconductors. And by the way, most people have now figured out no semiconductors means no prime scrap. No prime scrap means no structural steel, right? So the impacts are everywhere. And then, of course, as everybody got the vaccine, and we think we're coming out of it, and there's this war in Ukraine, right? With more uncertainty and more concerns about escalation. And then, by the way, COVID is back, right? If you look in what's going on in China, it seems like no matter where you look, something's coming around the corner, right? So, the challenge is there is to be aware of what's going on in the marketplace, to be flexible. Things are changing every day. We used to say that a lot of our supply chain challenges were with our manufacturers. This time it's not so much with our manufacturers, it's with their suppliers, right? It's downstream. It's harder for us to get our hands around. People have been asking for, can you give us a list of everything that's impacted? And no, you can't, because if you thought you had a list, 5 minutes later, the list was different. This would be the first time in my career where I've expedited paint, right? I could get the expansion joints, but they can't paint them because they don't have the paint. Or you can get the roofing material, but you can't get the fasteners, right? It's different this time. It's further downstream, and it's harder to get your hands around where that impact is going to come from. So, the challenge is in doing a lot of due diligence that we should all be doing anyway, but more so, right? We need to know where our materials are coming from, where they're actually manufactured. We need to stay in tune further downstream, not just with our trade partners, but with the manufacturers themselves.
So Mike, for the people who are out there listening, right, if we were to sort of leave them with a list of things that they should turn around and go check on, and we heard a ton of questions in this vein in the registration questions. What are the products that are most impacted? And we won't hold you to it. We know tomorrow the answer could be different, but today, what are those products that are most concerning?
The challenge there, at the risk of being dramatic, is it's everything, right? We know about roofing, but we didn't know about fasteners, right? Paint is still a challenge. Lack of prime scrap and competition for prime scrap driving up steel pricing, and the demand is still, putting joists out there very, very far. We've had supply chain challenges on door frames and hardware that we're not used to having before. So I purposefully don't want to say what the list is, because we need to be smart and we need to pay attention, because it could be anything tomorrow. We have a project in Canada that can't finish its roofing because it can't get its Hilti fasteners, right? It can't get the shots for the guns. So it's in strange places. They can't seam their roofing because the roofing equipment is missing semiconductors. There's a familiar story, right? So it's not even the product. It's several layers downstream in many cases.
Okay, well, we're going to have a lot to talk about. Jim, let's just talk a little bit about the projects in your region in the Mid-Atlantic. Can you give us some examples of how Mike's supply chain pain points, how are they impacting things?
Well, a couple ways. I'd say it really depends on the product. One of the things we've seen is a modification of the delivery method itself. So in this region, we typically do a lot of design build work, and that's come through the federal government. We've seen that expand into the airline industry, to data centers, education, industrial markets, you name it, much more so than we've seen in the past. And it's really an offshoot of what Mike just spoke about, right? It's not only the supply chain management, but it's also the lack of labor. We can't find trade labor, but we also can't find managerial labor. Our clients don't have the ability to manage design and construction professionals at the same time. So what they've done in theory is assign design management responsibilities to us and cut their responsibilities by 50%. Now, there are a lot of advantages that come out of design build. Like I said, for clients with resource constraints, we can be a one-stop shop. I think the other advantage right now is we can provide more price and schedule certainty earlier in the process. And if you consider the supply chain disruptions, in a design build model, we're able to order long lead equipment and material much earlier in the process. So if your schedule's tight and your schedule's critical, it becomes necessary to do so, and design build is one way to do it. I'd say also with your schedules, right, you don't follow a traditional linear process in the design build model. So we're able to provide another schedule advantage by starting components of the work as the design documents develop. And finally, there's just much more collaboration that naturally occurs in a design build model. So we're able to react to solve problems quickly, not just escalation and supply issues, but any problem that comes up.
So Mike, I'm going to jump back to you. One solution that was proposed, you know, Jim says we need to provide more price and schedule certainty. Changing the delivery method is a way to address that concern. What else are you seeing around the country that people are doing to get ahead of some of the challenges in the supply chain today?
Well, I mean, there's been some creative approaches, right? So first of
Let's hear 'em.
all, you know, first of all, we recommend that we stop thinking about just in time, very lean idea, and instead start thinking about just in case. We didn't make that up, right? But the idea of bringing in material just when you need it relies on a perfectly operating supply chain. And we haven't seen that in a very long time, frankly, if ever, right? So we want to release materials as quickly as we can and get them delivered or stored or warehoused. Now, that's obviously a demand on our clients to pay for materials early. But which is worse for the project, paying for materials early or materials not showing up on time when we need them, right? So getting materials early, releasing materials early. You know, here's a challenge for designers. Stop designing, right? We need to approve materials. We need to release them for fabrication, and we need to put our pencils down. One of the death knells to any material is a stamp that says revise and resubmit. If submittals are coming back, revise and resubmit, you're going to the back of the line. You may have, in all likelihood, you lost your production slot. So some recommendations would be have a submittal review plan. Bring in the subcontractor and/or the manufacturer, sit down with your team and the design team, and make sure it passes the ticket to admission when it comes in. So you don't lose, you know, a week with us reviewing it, 3 weeks with the designer reviewing it, only to come back, revise and resubmit. We just don't have the time, right? So that would be one idea. You know, other things regarding escalation, for the right price, anybody will take the risk of escalation. That doesn't mean we or our clients can or are willing to afford it, right? So there could be some creative things. So if we can afford to buy materials lump sum, we should, right? That's good for everybody. But if we can't, we need to have some creativity. Some of the things that we've done is tied some material to indices like the London Metals Exchange. Years ago, we were buying lead containment for a project that didn't need the lead for 2 years. So we tied them in their contract to the London Metals Exchange Index, and the difference in index times quantity was going to equal plus or minus. By the way, it's got to be a two-way street, however their contract is adjusted. And we had an allowance in the general contract to address that. Not everything lends itself to an index. You know, in one case, we took the subcontractor's vendor's pricing sheet for drywall, for example, and we're able to set aside what would have been over $1 million worth of escalation, again, for material we didn't need for over a year. And the agreement in the contract was that when he went to buy his materials, we would get a new pricing sheet. The difference in the unit prices times quantity equals. As it turns out, prices went down. We'd have expected that to happen, and the owner was entitled to a credit. But we held an allowance there for that as well. We had another situation where we could have probably tied it to an index for copper, but prices were scary. And in this case, we or the owner had a warehouse facility, and we told them before we even had a bucket in the ground, go buy your copper wire, put it in the warehouse. We got the keys, you're going to sign it in and out. But they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential escalation in the copper. So there's some creative things that we can do. And then lastly, I'd recommend being flexible on the specifications. If designers or clients have that one thing that their world revolves around, I can guarantee you where the supply chain interruption is going to be, right? We need to have options. We need to be creative. You know, maybe the answer is how close to this can I get? Put something on the table that's available and work together and be transparent.
So it sounds like avoid Murphy's Law is one of your recommendations. I wanted to ask about prefab. We've had multiple questions already about whether prefab really does help to resolve some of these issues within the supply chain, or do you just bang up against the same problem? So what would you say, and anybody else, please jump in, prefabrication has been something that teams are looking at to avoid supply chain pinch points.
I can say, yes, prefabrication can help, especially with the labor shortage. If the labor is not available in the cities that we work, and we can put the labor in a factory in a city where labor is available, and at the same time, we can build materials in a temperature controlled facility, it's safer, it's better. We can be fabricating those materials while the rest of the building's being built. We can often shave time off the schedule. Those are all very positive things. Some of the challenges are it's a decision that needs to be made very early in the design process, right? At some point, you need to stop designing. You need to buy the contractor that's going to do it, because all prefabrication or modularization companies don't do it the same way. So we need to get their processes into the system and release them early. And the other challenge is the industry itself is still, it's growing. I almost think it's still embryonic. If you believed you needed at least 3 bidders, there may not be 3 companies that can do that. And now, of course, you have that challenge of our clients feeling like things were competitively bid and we got the best value for our dollar and so forth. I think it's a great option. I think where we can do it, it's the right approach. It can get ahead of the supply chain by dealing with those material availability issues earlier. It's just we have to make the decision early and make sure that we have the right number of trade partners that can do the work.
Okay.
Sarah, I can piggyback on that. In Seattle, just part of the way we've done business is typically MEP trades are design build. They're brought on early to be part of the design process. Another trend that we're seeing now, to Mike's point, is we're bringing on other trades as well early on in the design process. One, to get some certainty around design, and so that we can procure material and potentially even do more prefabrication. But to Julia's point before about mass timber, that's the other thing we're starting to see more now as a result of all of that. We have one project that just starting off mass timber. It's a pretty significant mass timber project. We have 2 projects where we've explored that originally weren't designed to be mass timber. One of them actually is being converted now to mass timber, and we're moving forward with that. And another one, we're doing a study on whether it should be steel frame or mass timber. And a lot of these decisions are as a result of material cost, material availability, and having more certainty and control over design up front, so that we've got a better understanding of the final outcome. And it's the right thing to do as well from a sustainability standpoint.
Oh, by the way, perfect segue into Julia. The thumbs up is so appropriate. So how does sustainability help tie into, connect to supply chain? What can you tell us about the trade-offs people are making, good ones or bad ones?
Yeah, thanks for the lead-in, Bill. So with inflation, I mean, we're looking at out of the gate, what, Mike and guys, 10% potentially less buying power right now. So in some cases, that is causing owners to slow down and cut back plans to get greener, but it's rare that we're seeing sustainability targets shelved completely. And because of what I talked about earlier, companies right now just can't afford to do that with investor expectations sometimes, which are increasing. But we are absolutely having conversations about alternative materials that are either less expensive or easier to get our hands on. So Mike and I were just talking about a job where the client opted for concrete over steel because they weren't confident in the lead times of steel or the availability of it. And so, was there carbon trade-off there? Potentially. We didn't do a whole building life cycle analysis on that job, but it's possible, because concrete supply is more local. And so you might have saved on the transporting steel to the job site, but unless there was an intentional effort to spec a lower carbon mix design, it's very possible that the overall carbon footprint of that job suffered a little bit just based on that decision. So we're engaging in those types of conversations a lot more regularly, having discussions with owners and design teams to consider and weigh sustainability factors in addition to cost and schedule and performance, which are always going to be kind of the key things. So cost and schedule, are two of the factors, but owners, they don't want to trade sustainability if they don't have to. And so they want to know what options do we have that are for low to no premium, is the conversation we're having a lot. One of the things that we're doing almost daily these days is these page turns, essentially, usually with structural specs, but I call them, more like peer reviews with the design team. We're talking about, availability of lower carbon options and in that specific geographical location to the project. And I mean, we're getting very, very specific, and you have to. I mean, this is, this ready mix guy has these EPDs to, track carbon, and this guy has X type of aggregate that might help us replace Y amount of cement or with fly ash or slag or whatever it is. And this option is cost neutral, and this option is 3% or 5% more or less or whatever it is. And then for steel, we're getting really granular on deciding not just between suppliers, but exact mills from where we want to buy. Aligning that with availability can be tricky, lead times, costs, but we're trying to put all the factors on the table to help our clients make the most informed decisions, because they're weighing so much. There's so many factors in play right now. Same thing goes, that's structure. Same thing goes for finishes. Just heard about a project a few weeks ago, and they were looking at bamboo instead of softwood lumber because they were having lumber issues, and lumber is expensive. So, a cheaper potentially material, comparable material properties, abundantly available. So we are absolutely, having, those types of discussions. And, before
I have one last question for you, Julia.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you engaging consistently across the country? Are there regions where your team is spending all of their time, and regions that no one's calling? Can you just give me a sense of where do you see yourself? Where are you spending the most time regionally right now?
Yeah, good question. So we have our team is kind of dispersed geographically. So we're in almost every region supporting sustainability, but I'll say for a long time, it was California in the Northwest, kind of cornered my time, my calendar. It's not so much the case anymore. I'm spending more time in the Northeast, but we've got a lot of work in the center of the country with some big tech clients. And it's clients that are wanting to push the envelope in sustainability and really create market shift in the space is where I'm spending a lot of my time. And so that's
great.
It's kind of following the client necessarily than following the region.
All right. Well, if anybody needs to learn more, call Julia. It sounds like she knows where all the right questions are being asked. I wanted to spend the last few minutes before we take questions talking about labor. The impact on labor that we spoke about previously. I'm curious if anything has changed in your markets. That the availability of skilled labor has really been changed by a few things. One was the government subsidies and the support that was provided during the pandemic. It was hard to sort of get people to come to job sites. The other was, virus spread, people being sick. Those were the discussions that we were having a year ago. And now that perspective has changed, has labor availability changed at all? So I just wanted to start with Mike. Are you seeing labor impacting construction starts and developer planning?
Well, the good news is we have not seen it affect construction starts at this time. We are all competing for labor, absolutely. Some of the impacts of labor that are still lingering are parents that can't return to work because their children don't have daycare, or bus driver shortages, things that you didn't really think of as impacting our projects. But if parents have to, if they don't have daycare, or they have to pick up and drop off their children at a certain time, it's hard for them to return to the workforce. And then, of course, you have, what seems to be significant retirements. When we started hearing about, they were calling it the Great Resignation or whatever they were calling it, everybody just assumed it was frankly younger people, but it turned out to be an acceleration of the retirement of the baby boomers. We all knew that was coming pre-recession or pre-pandemic. We all talked about it. We all knew that was going to impact us, but it sped up, and it came with a vengeance. So it's been those have been some of the impacts from labor. We have not seen it impacting construction starts yet, but we've also seen, quite a competition for labor, right? When we have an area of the country with a lot of projects that are coming, there's a race to make the awards and take the trade partners off the market and know that you've got them locked up and you've got their labor before the competitor down the street can hire them. That's very real, and we're seeing it. But in order to do that, you have to be able to bring those contractors on early, right? Maybe in a design assist phase. Not every contractor has the skill set for design assist, so you have to hire the right people. You have to hire them early. You can get them engaged, and by doing so, kind of lock up that piece of the market, if you will, selfishly for that project, but at the expense of the project down the street, which is a little slower.
So I want to go around the room and just talk a little bit about labor, impact of labor, and if things have really changed in terms of labor availability. And Mike gave us a good national overview, but Jim, what are you seeing in the Mid-Atlantic? How is labor impacting your success and your client's success? What are you doing about it?
Yeah, there's a big shortage of electricians and iron workers, and we call it the Amazon effect just because of all the data centers that are in the Northern Virginia area. But it's drawing a tremendous amount of folks, and we'll draw electricians from as far away as North Carolina, right? Just like Mike said, they'll go where the money is, and they can come up here and make X plus 30% if they work at on a data center, 75 miles north of where they live, and that's what they're doing. You got to have a good project, right? So that's the most important part for our clients. We tell our clients, you have to have a good project, right? A good realistic schedules, good design docs, permits are complete so you can hit the ground running. That's the way to draw subcontractors with good labor pools. The other thing we're doing is working on workforce development through the schools, through the public entities, and on our own to develop that future workforce. It's a necessity, and it's the right thing to do. Bill said earlier.
Jeff, how about you in Florida? And is there anything that we're specifically doing on our job sites to make sure that people want to come to Turner job sites as opposed to maybe the other one down the street?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think to the labor competition aspect, right? You have to make your job more desirable than the one that's a mile down the road or closer to home, necessarily, right? So that's I think one of the silver linings that goes along with this labor shortage is that we're creating a different environment on our projects that is really focused on creating the right environment for not only our staff and the design firms and our owners, but also for the laborers and the craft folk that are working on our projects, right? Making sure that the facilities that we provide for them are clean, that we've got break areas that are air conditioning, especially in the hot, humid summers here in Florida, right? Really focusing on how do we create an environment where somebody wants to, again, just I'm going to go work for that Turner construction project down the road, because in Florida you don't have a lot of loyalty to necessarily the trades don't have a lot of loyalty from one side contractor to the next. It's going to be where can I get another $2 or $3 in my hourly pay, and so that kind of alongside of this is creating an environment in a safe place for people to work is a big deal for us right now, and that's yielding some benefits. And to Jim's point too, right? The workforce development. This is going to be key for the sustainability of our industry, as we're seeing a significant by 2026 or something like 29% of the current construction workforce is going to be leaving the market, right? And so in the back feed for that 29% is not 29%. So workforce development, apprenticeship programs, anything that we can do to train labor on our projects and get them interested in construction and what I would consider a high-paying job, wages that are available these days, is really important.
Nino, how about you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to recognize that the strain in the market, in the labor market, is a systemic issue that has been going on now for a while. It's not certainly something that started with the pandemic. It's being probably exacerbated by the rebound to the pandemic. But I heard that for every 4 workers, skilled workers that are retiring, there only 1 worker is entering the job market. So clearly, this is not a sustainable model. And all the effort to attract more workers into our business are important, but also the way we manage our business is going to be important, gaining more efficiencies. I liked what Jim said about have a reasonable schedule, have more pre-construction, have more planning involved. In Southern California, we don't struggle with the labor availability to actually staff the projects as much as we struggle when we ask for acceleration. When there is an unforeseen delay and all of a sudden throw people at the problem, even union subcontractors have a hard time finding additional resources, especially additional skilled resources. So it'll be interesting to see how the entire industry is going to solve this problem that is continuing on.
All right, last one up, Bill. Tell us your tales of labor availability in the Seattle area.
Everyone's already hit on everything that I would throw out there, but I'm going to double down on what we're calling DEI in the field. So diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field. In the past few months, we've hired a new CNC community and citizenship director. And just this Monday, our new CNC coordinator started. And our efforts are focused on pre-apprenticeship programs, workforce engagement to get more women in the trades and more people of color in the trades. And we've done a lot of work on that in the past few months and are making a much stronger effort in this next year to do that. And the reason for that is that Turner then becomes where the trades want to work, and it becomes where our trade partners, we become who our trade partners want to work for. So as we have labor issues, being the company who they want to work for makes a huge difference, right? They're asking us for what projects to put down in their backlog so they can create the capacity, to work for us in the future. So huge effort for us. And I think it's a really important one as well.
Yeah, proactive. And it's another theme we've had today. It's just the right thing to do. All right. So Lisa's back. That's our cue to take questions.
Yep, we have about 7 minutes left, so we could probably hit a few of the questions that came in, and there were many questions, so we'll try and follow up after the panel. I think I'm going to throw a softball out there because I know what the answer is, but there's been obviously a lot of discussion, and it sounds like the general theme is pre-planning, getting the entire team engaged early. What's the team's gut on getting a CM involved early during pre-construction, and how have you seen that kind of impact the success of a project, especially with the supply chain issues, labor concerns? And I will open that up to anybody.
I'll jump in. It's a necessity at this point. It only helps the projects. And I can tell you almost without exception, when the CM isn't not involved early or hasn't been involved early on projects that have launched in the last couple of years, it's just not good, right? Schedules suffer, budgets suffer. It just doesn't work. You have to do that these days.
And have we been taking it? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say more critical than ever in pre-construction to do a deep dive on critical and near critical path materials, understand their availability. If we're designing in a vacuum and the CM is getting involved downstream, the design may have gone to the point where the impacts are just going to be tremendous, right? We need to involve the CM and the opportunity to review the materials, look for alternatives, understand availability, still with the understanding things could change. But at least as of the design, you have some ideas of what materials are available.
And Lisa, last thing on this, getting the closest to the market that you can get is important. So I would say the CM involvement is a necessity, but we also need to be engaging with our subcontractors. That doesn't mean you have to give them a contractor, but you have to be talking to them about their pain points today. So the specifications, the design can be developed with the level of flexibility that's going to be necessary for success. And I don't know how you can get that close to the subcontractor if you're not engaging through the CM market.
Right. Agreed. I mean, prices that used to be held for months are now being held for weeks or days. So big impact, big impact. Shifting a little bit to sustainability and some of the regulations. Obviously here locally in New York, we have Local Law 97, which is focused on operational carbon reductions. I know, Sarah, you're very close to this. Do we see impacts, or what kind of cost impacts do we see coming to the New York market? And then Julia, you could probably speak a little bit just more high level to this nationally.
I mean, we're certainly seeing cost impacts regularly on raw material. Labor is not going down. So like I said, we're in a buyer's market, but there's not a lot of money on the table to be saved right now. So what we're looking at with Local Law 97 and the changes that building owners have to make in order to be compliant with the law are requiring them to put in a tremendous amount of capital into their buildings. We're seeing that retrofit cost. It's coming up into the market against all the other market concerns with residential and the infrastructure work in New York. So you have a buyer's market, yet we're still seeing prices increasing. Did that answer your question, Lisa?
Yeah. Julia, any larger national perspective just with sustainability initiatives?
Yeah, I would just say that, other cities and other states are watching what happens with Local 97, and others like it, very closely, like hawks, to see to watch what comes out of it, to see the lessons learned that come out of it. And, but I think despite, what Sarah is sharing, what I see coming down the pike from cities and states and other jurisdictions is that there are going to be more of them. So being able to, even within Turner, I mean, we're going to be looking to that New York, probably Boston right on its heels, right? To learn, how we're coping with those things.
And the market's responding to this legislation by looking and developing, researching new products. So we are going to see new things coming to market to be part of the Local Law 97 and the carbon reduction plan.
Fueled a lot of innovation, which has been really exciting to watch.
Yes, a lot of innovation. And it's also fueling the greening of the grid as well. So you have a lot of people sort of waiting to see what happens with New York State greening their grid, and if that's going to impact the need that they have within their own property to pull out carbon from their systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Last final question, get a minute for this. Bill, this one was directed to you, but it is open to others. What percentage of residential are you seeing new construction versus remodel or rehab? And I'll open it up larger. It's a good question. What percentage are we seeing kind of across the globe on renovation projects versus out of the ground construction? And have you seen that change? Yeah.
In Seattle, it's been all, at least for us, it's been 100% new ground up high-rise residential. We actually are just finishing the first high-rise low-income residential project in Seattle in the past 50 years. There's a lot more low-income housing coming to the market, which is great. I imagine, though, as the housing market continues to get saturated, that we'll see more renovation and rehab opportunities.
Well, we have reached 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all for your participation. I know you could talk about state of the industry forever and ever. We're going to send out the recording for this session. Thank you all again for your time and your efforts here. We'll keep this up on the screen if you want to connect with everybody on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. We'll have another state of the industry after Q2, and there's more to follow. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.